welcome to And Still We Rise. I'm your host, Christine Seidel, and today we have therapist Madison Reed joining us. Hello, Madison.
Hi, how's it going?
It's great. Thank you for joining us. Today, Madison is going to be talking about performance based identity, which is such an important topic, I think. In terms of, I know we hear that a lot of times for kids that are in school, but it's interesting how I think that's popping up in a lot of adults today that haven't really addressed some of those issues from the past that's still kind of creeping in. So, super excited to get into that topic with you. And before we get started, I would love to read a bio about you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Madison Reed is a therapist with Rise Therapy Center that is passionate about helping people navigate anxiety, build emotional resilience, and discover who they are beyond the roles they play. In her work, she guides individuals through the process of shedding expectations, whether from family, society, or themselves, to build an identity that feels authentic and grounded. I love that. Madison believes overcoming anxiety and creating resiliency isn't about perfection or performance, but learning to trust yourself and face uncomfortable moments with curiosity, building the tolerance needed to grow through life's challenges. Oh, amazing. Love that bio. And full disclaimer, I get to brag a little bit that I got to be a part of Madison's learning experience and emerging into the beautiful therapist that she is today as we've been able to work alongside each other for the last couple of years. So I'm super excited to have this talk with you and share it with our listeners. So with that being said, let's get in it.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So tell us and tell the listeners a little bit about what is performance-based identity. What does that mean and how does it kind of affect somebody's sense of self?
Yeah. It's a bit of a phenomena I think I'm seeing a lot right now. I would say probably 75% of my clients have some version of this, and it's all ages. It's not just kids, which I think it's often kind of attached to.
Yeah.
And kind of how I describe it is who you are is what you do, not the characteristics that make up that sense of self.
Mm,
So I think you find this a lot in different things like school or your job or sports. But I even think go to more of a societal aspect of what it means to be a woman and to be a sister or to be a daughter or to be even a version of a friend in a specific type of group. And it's
mm,
overall just this performing a sense of self rather than leading with more of that integrity and that more moral compass and some of those like personality traits. Um,
mm. Which I mean, if you put it into that scope, I mean, even the identities that we hold within the structure of a family, like
Yep.
sister or daughter, like how much of that is influenced through performance. We can honestly say, okay, yeah, like maybe in school and maybe in work, like we're super like focused on our identity being attributed to performance, but those identities that we feel are so organic to who we are, how much of that identity is rooted in performance and achievement and what we're actually doing versus who we really are. So that is the scope of, I think, something that we haven't really talked much about is the spectrum of performance identity through all of the different titles and labels that we carry.
Yeah.
So interesting. So how did this kind of come up, so to speak? It's like, what did you start noticing?
I I think, right, one of my favorite interventions is the values card sort. And I do that often with different people just to as a good introductory of like, tell me who you are beyond like some of these basic facts. And it's an activity that a lot of people really struggle with. They can put a value of like, I value art, right? But when I ask why, it's like, oh, well, because I paint or it's just something I enjoy, right? Oh, but like, why? Like, why does that light you up? And just a bit of a detachment between like even these values and these things that are supposed to be these guiders in life, but not a real motivator behind it.
Mm,
And I think as I like kind of started to notice that, I also randomly get a bunch of very school avoidant teens and a lot
mm.
of very burnout college kids. And I think
Yeah.
as I started to unpack that, it was because they had put so much pressure on this thing. And as soon as life got a little hard and school or just life in general got harder to maintain because the expectations grew or even just the challenges got harder, it was instead of this idea of, okay, well, that stinks. I got this F, or I'm struggling to adapt. Like, let me try again. Let me do better. It was, I'm the worst. I'm not enough. Who am I? Where do I go from here? And it created this bit of burnout aspect where, like, kind of turned into a bit of depression too, where it's like, I can't get out of bed because what am I? What do I do now that I don't have this thing that has been my sense of self for this whole time?
Yeah, I love that you say, if they, fail a test or something, rather than being able to look at it and say, okay, there's learning for me to evolve in, or there's a place where I can grow in my learning. There's material I still need to understand and absorb. It was, I'm a failure. And I think we see that, like, there's this, extreme thinking of like, I'm the best or I'm a failure. And so I think that lens of like, when you get feedback that it's not the best, that it's just an opportunity to learn. But I think so many of our clients still have that very extreme thinking. And I love the values card sort. I think you actually brought that in supervision a couple of years ago, and it was kind of new to me. And I love using that with clients too, specifically because you can also see like when they get a value, and it's almost like they feel like they should value this, like it's a
Mhm.
projection from their families or their peers or whatever, like I should value this, but like actually kind of don't. But you see kind of that grappling with it because of that, I guess maybe what you said, detachment of like their own sense of agency when it comes to values and how they show up with integrity within that. So tell me, how does society, or like, of course, as we all know, like social media, all the things that are in front of us constantly, how does that influence like the shaping of a performance-based identity?
Yeah. Great question. So a lot of performance-based identities, I think, come a lot from childhood, and it comes naturally. It's not even at fault of parents most of the time, but the tangible things to praise a kid on are the things that they do. The first really like, yay, is a word or walking, and then it kind of just gets worse from there. It's you do sports and you have a whole like team cheering you on, and you get all of this like kind of positive feedback, and that is rewarding. So that's where that investment kind of comes from rather than complimenting something like, "Oh, you're so creative." It's like, "Wow, that picture's awesome."
Mm,
So
yeah, like
that kind of
instead of the characteristic of
Mhm.
what you embody, it's more of like, what is the result of what you did?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think social media kind of continues that trend. It's all about posting what you are doing, right? If I go on this awesome hike, I'm going to post it. And rather than somebody seeing, like, oh, she loves nature and being outdoors, be like, oh my gosh, she did a 7 mile hike. Like, that's crazy. And
Yeah.
it just continues on as well as kind of broadening your scope of what you should be doing
Mhm.
when that isn't grounded in even that person's sense of self. It's
Yeah.
again this fakeness, but now my expectations, my performance, my role is shifting and changing over just something that is not even a real thing.
Yeah, or it's not highlighting what was the like intention, and what was the integrity that brought that person to that place, right? So again, like social media is the highlights of our life, so to speak. Here's my 7 mile hike, but like I didn't start with a 7 mile hike. I started
Sure.
with struggling with a mile, right? And I think that is kind of, something we have to be really intentional about as people who, receive content, and also people who put out content. It's not just about the doing or the ultimate achievement. It's about the process and the journey. And that brings up a lot of stuff like rooted in childhood too. If you're always kind of rewarded for whatever the end result is, how do you learn about yourself through that process and through that journey? And I was thinking about parents even, like sometimes parents aren't really conscientious of how they're posting their children and their
Mm.
achievements, that they really don't have agency, at 7, 8 years old to want their like accomplishments posted out in social media. So as they get to an age where they are on social media and they go back and look and they're like, oh, look at all the things that were posted about me were about the things I was doing and not like, that I was being weird in the ocean because I, I'm a kid and like that's just part of being a kid is being weird. And so I think even sometimes without even just receiving that projection, we can get into older ages and look back and be like, oh wow, like I was really celebrated on the things that I was accomplishing and performing, but not necessarily how I was being. So, that's something I think parents can be conscientious of too around, you know, how they are kind of priming their child without them really having the agency to be able to have a say so in that. So,
Yeah,
well, tell me,
absolutely.
like, so, not that we want to go from one end of the spectrum to the other, but let's. So, how do we develop a sense of like confidence and motivation and drive to do things without getting rooted in this like performance-based identity?
Yeah, I think if that is something that you are struggling with, a good kind of way to deconstruct it is always kind of that first step is being more aware of what that thought process is. And I think for performance based identity specifically, you'll see that in criticism, right? So
Mhm.
if at your job, it's like this note from your boss, are you overthinking? Are you taking it home and you're like, oh, what could I have done differently? What should I have done? But like, and kind of really getting stuck in that place and with a kind of negative note to it, that's
Yeah.
probably because, right, that sense of self is kind of being tarnished a little bit.
Mhm.
So once you kind of start noticing those, it's just got to add a little bit of weight to the other side of the scale. Because what happens is if we let these thoughts kind of just keep going, that sense of self not only is not allowing itself to kind of come to light, but it's also like, oh, okay, well, that's okay. Like, I'll just stay down here. Don't mind me.
Yeah.
So just adding a little bit of that confrontation to it where it's like, well, okay, like I know we're freaking out about this right now, but this is part of it. Like I'm growing, I am learning, and that's okay. And this has nothing to do with me. Just to fight it as well as give that sense of self a bit of that empowerment and being like, okay, yeah, like we're being seen, we're being noticed. Now I can feel more comfortable maybe coming out in a different way.
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of like the biggest thing to deconstruct.
Mhm.
But I think if you're someone that maybe doesn't have this big sense of performance-based identity, but are worried about going there, the power of why is such a great tool. And I think people talk about it specifically with feelings like, okay, why am I feeling anger or sad? But I think it can be anything. It's why am I choosing a yellow swimsuit over a blue swimsuit? Asking
Mm.
yourself those questions, it's like, well, this reminds me of sunshine, and you can attach it to a memory or just be like, well, I just never get outside, and this is my one way to do that.
Mm.
It's though you are leading with your sense of self, it's just not being noticed. And the moment that we start noticing it, the more comfortability is going to be there. And that doesn't have to be in these like big, tangible, like deep ways. It can just be in small things of like dinner or while you're listening to a song or just checking in with that sense of self can empower it enough that that performance-based identity isn't going to win.
Yeah. Well, and I think that kind of goes to like how you work with clients in general, like finding that that lens of authenticity, right? Like
Mhm.
who we authentically are is not rooted in our performance. Our authenticity does make things occur in this world. It does, bring about change and brings beauty and it brings, new ideas. Like that's part of authentically what we're here to do. But it's inherently good. It's
Right.
inherently going to produce goodness. So, but if you know what that authenticity is, when it's rooted in those characteristics, like you said, like what is it about this that lights me up and makes me me? Oh, it's because I love nature.
Mhm.
I love beautiful, bright colors. Like I'm a cheerful person, like coming up with those characteristics that are authentic to you, but don't bring about performance, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm a cheerful person, so I have a large group of friends, right? Like some people would be
Right.
like, oh, she has so many friends. That's in some ways kind of saying like achievement. I've achieved this versus I have a lot of friends because I'm a cheerful person. That's just authentic to who I am. So I
Yeah.
think rooting into what are those authentic characteristics is so much of part of asking yourself that why question, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, and I think something that you just brought up reminded me too, where it's if I am only looking for a pacer of if I'm doing well, is if I'm doing good at my job, if I, right, all of these things that we've kind of talked about, it also kind of stops you from being able to really recognize what your vices are.
Mhm.
Because, right, as long as I've got a good paying job and I got this house that I want and the family that I want, I'm good, right? Not recognizing like what is leading you to that thing or to lie or to have dark thoughts or to whatever those things are. And if you're not leading with that authenticity, you're not even going to get to see the flip side to be able to grow and develop and heal from those different things.
Yeah, and I think that that brings up the point that you were kind of saying, like if you're, if you're not conscious of what you're actually feeling in that drive for performance, you're going to be somewhat detached from yourself until you're not, right? Like it always, the nervous system will call you back. It'll be
For
like,
sure.
how about burnout this year? That would be fun. If you're not going to be conscious, then we'll just do burnout. But I think if you're going in that mindset and then a little disruptor has you ruminating around that disruption, that's a pretty good indicator that you're really focusing your identity on how others are perceiving your achievements or your performance versus is this authentic to who I am, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
What about like support systems? Like how can, I know we work with a lot of families and stuff. Um, I know you work with a lot of teens and people rooted in anxiety. How can like support systems, even, in adulthood, how can they help navigate somebody who's kind of trying to work through their performance-based identity?
Yeah, I think specifically, I'm thinking more of like friend groups, but I think you can do this in a family as well. Finding your comfort person
Mm,
is super helpful because essentially, right, if you're recovering from this and you have one person that really you feel comfortable knowing truly who you are, there's
mhm,
going to be a bit of feeling like, okay, I have this person, they've received me well. I can now test these other relationships, as
mhm,
well as almost being anchored back to that sense of self, right? So if you're at like a big friend gathering and you're noticing you're very detached and you're being super optimistic and bubbly and that's not really who you are, going back to that comfort person and just having that second to just be can
yeah.
help reel that back in, and
Mhm,
also be a good way to have a comparison to even recognize that that's something that you're doing. And I think
mhm.
in families it gets a little bit harder because they are a bit habitual and I think what they expect of you, that's what we'll say.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, though, they probably have also seen your truest form, right? Because that's going to be when you were a kid and you didn't have the world telling you all these things that you should be.
Mhm,
And I think sometimes that can be an empowering thing too, to know like this, they've seen this already. I have just now covered this all down. Let me see how I can reincorporate this and know that it's not a new thing for them. And in a
mhm,
way, they've already accepted it because they've already experienced it.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's where boundaries and all those sorts of things can come in too, of putting their expectations in check of who they're expecting you to be when that is not you.
Well, and I think that's such a good point where you're saying like find your comfort person, right? Because that performance-based identity, like you said, oftentimes goes back to childhood. So like the people you would assume like would be your comfort people may not necessarily be your comfort people.
Yep.
They may be part of that conditioning. And so finding that person that can see you with authenticity outside of performance, but to see those characteristics that are so intrinsically like who you are and can speak that to you,
Mhm.
having that as like a home base that when I see myself kind of going in that direction, this person is very intentional, and that might be a therapist. Like sometimes that's the only place that we have that that comfort and that safety of authenticity. But being rooted in, like, I know that this person speaks truth to me from a place of authenticity and not of my value is inherent to performance. Sometimes that's not in our family systems, like you said, they can be a little habitual. I think for families, because like that's such an organic place for us to get identity, if you're not a performance-based identity person, or trying to project that onto somebody, but you're really conscious of not wanting that to be something for your children or for your other family members, like, be so conscious about speaking that those true characteristics into people, right?
Mm.
Versus what it is they're achieving or what they're performing. So on either side of that relationship, for people, for listeners who are like, I really don't struggle with that, like, that's a good reminder on, like, okay, if you don't struggle with that, how can you be a supporter of the people that you love and care about by seeing their authenticity and being a speaker of that authenticity when they're struggling, or you see them moving in that direction.
Yeah.
So, well, so tell me a little bit about, like, how does this present itself when it's kind of gotten a little bit out of control, right? Because you mentioned burnout. I know I've worked with clients who genuinely, especially at young ages that we wouldn't really think would be, getting this burned out, like not being able to navigate life in the same way. So tell me how this can, when it's left unchecked or without a support system, how can this affect somebody negatively?
Yeah, I think there's honestly a lot of like hot ticket words that I are really this as well, where I think people talk about like gifted kid burnout is a part of
Mhm.
this, right? And we kind of just talked about burnout, but I think also midlife crisis is a part of this as well, where it's like I just completed half my life and I have no idea what is underneath all of these things. It's a bit of this like I've hit this wall and now I don't have a sense of self and I'm no longer getting that purpose from my career.
Yeah.
Um, and I think with that it comes with a lot of anxiety because I like to define anxiety. I don't know what the definition is because I don't think it's that good. So my
Yeah.
definition is, right?
Some definition, yay.
Yeah. Chronically feeling out of control, but your brain's way of finding that sense of control, even if it's not real.
Mhm.
So if you are putting your sense of self into all of these things that are not you, that is not in your control, right?
Mm,
If the test is super hard, or if, they are minimizing your department,
mm,
or just somebody has wrong expectations, that is not in your control, but you're putting so much weight in that. Your
mm,
brain is going to try to overcompensate for that. And that's where you get a lot of overthinking and that negative self-talk trying to keep you at this like low expectation. Um, and just this overall sense of uneasiness of like somebody's going to find me out that I'm not actually as good at this, or some of that like imposter syndrome things.
mm,
And really it goes even deeper, I think, than anxiety sometimes, where you lose that sense of self-trust. Where at the end of the day, you're probably good at your job because there's a piece of you that is good at that. I'm a good therapist because I am empathetic, right? And I get identity from my job, but that is not who I am.
mm,
But if I were to just be like, "Oh, I'm just a good therapist because, well, this is what I've chose and this is just who I am," that piece is going away. And that ability to be like, "I trust myself to do the thing," is
mhm.
gone because I've told it for so long that that's not what has led me to this point.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
So, what I'm hearing there is, like, if you're doing something without a sense of purpose, and purpose is really rooted in authenticity, it's rooted in identity and values that are truly aligned with us. If we are not doing things with that sense of purpose and understanding, and kind of like maybe buy in subconsciously, like, I'm buying into this because it genuinely kind of lights me up and it feels so authentic and it's a place where I can serve, that detachment is going to occur. And if that detachment occurs for too long, you're brought to a place of anxiety
Yeah.
or dysregulation. Like, the two, if your mind and body are not in sync, it will eventually present itself to you physiologically through anxiety, through dysregulation, avoidance, like a way of just not being able to kind of continue. And I think that's a great point, especially with like midlife, like transitions, like coming to a point where it's like, I've done this job, or I've done this, or I've been a mom, or I've been a parent, or and now that is changing. Or now I just lost my job, or, I'm not getting, the awards I used to get. That awareness of like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, and we see it in a lot of teens that are taking these very, very accelerated courses that they're really developmentally not ready for.
Hmm.
Was that something that they felt purpose to do, or was that something they felt pressured to do?
Right.
So I think, that point that you're making is like doing things and being in this world with more of a sense of purpose versus what you're getting on the other side of that. And when you talked about you being a therapist, you don't go around saying, well, I see X number of clients, and here's all their data of who's made, progress and achievements. And you're like, I'm a good therapist because I step into a place of service that I feel so purposed for. I see these patterns that I can speak to and help. And that's rooted in purpose. That's not
Yeah.
rooted in achievement. So I think that's a really good point, from even when we're working with littles, for parents to be able to say, here are these really cool characteristics I see in you, you
Hmm.
know? So as they start making decisions for themselves, what sport they want to play or extracurricular or whatever, they get to know that they get to do that because they feel skilled and purposed and, excited when they step into that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So how does somebody, if like a listener is listening to this and they're like, okay, I've got a real issue with some performance-based identity. I, have done a lot of therapy. I don't know where to start from here, but I'm really, really dysregulated. I know you work with a lot of anxiety. You get a lot of clients who are coming in being like, I'm aware of a lot of things, but I'm just completely, my body's just in an anxious state. How would they get started with trying to correct this in a way that's going to have lasting change?
Yeah. I think that you can always kind of implement some of those grounding techniques because again, if your brain and your body are not communicating, it's going to be really hard for you to have any sort of awareness in order to be able to change, right? So I think coming up with a game plan that works for you, and everyone's kind of got to test their own things. There's unfortunately not a one size fits all, but right, it is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where I go through all my senses and I find the things in the room, or I have a specific playlist that feels like me that I put on afterwards, right? And I have that auditory kind of grounding. It's a comfort blanket or a plushie you slept with as a kid, or like whatever those fun things are that are something with my body that's connected to my sense of self, that kind of combines a little bit of those grounding techniques and what we're trying to do, which is reconnect with who you are and act accordingly.
Mm.
So those are kind of like my like kind of go-to, but from there, right, it's unfortunately not an easy thing
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, you probably have gone 15, 20, 30, 50 years with this habit. And just like any habit, it's going to take some time, and it's through awareness and then doing the grounding things and being easy on yourself when maybe you just slip back into that performance-based identity.
Mhm.
That's okay, right? And that's where the comfort people come into, is at the end of the day, like that person should be your reward a little bit of, this person sees me and I like my relationship and you probably feel more connected. That is going to help you continue and get some momentum because the rest of your life can have that same sort of color and feeling to it as well.
Yeah, or the same color and feeling of being in that cycle of performing. So what all of those strategies that you just explained about grounding, and it's all of that was just being. It wasn't
Mhm.
doing.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So, like, that's a really good recommendation, is like, and it's so interesting, and you probably see this too, like when people come to therapy, they're like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And oftentimes the answer is like, you be, you
Yeah.
know, do the things that bring you back to a place of calm, to a place of familiarity, like a stuffy from childhood, or like come to a place of just being versus doing, because you can't hear you can't hear yourself if your brain is just playing in rumination. And that's what's happening, even though we're not aware of it, in high levels of anxiety. So, going back to that bio of yours, authenticity and groundedness, like
Mhm.
that's where all the answers occur. And I love that you said that every situation is so different, because as a therapist, you can't even hear that until they get to a place of grounding, because they can't hear it, and
Yeah.
they're really the ones that can access it. So finding, those practices that get you back into a place of being, having that comfort person who can be a place of reflection for them. It's almost like this reminder of what the body already knows but can't hear, because the brain is telling its chatter that doesn't matter, so to speak.
There you go.
Yeah. And, I think starting with a therapist like yourself, where they really do know how to be present with you in that place, do those types of interventions like the value sort card, so they can see. Sometimes they can't access it when they're first coming to therapy, because they're trying to fix it, that they can't actually be with themselves, with their values, and hear that authenticity again. So I think that, like, you just kind of giving the scope of, like, pause.
Right.
Pause, don't do anything right now. Come to a place of being. And that's a tough threshold for a lot of people to cross, because I think even as a culture, we're so conditioned to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So, well, is there anything else you'd like to add about performance-based anxiety, or, anything that you feel like would be a good resource for listeners?
Um, I guess my maybe just like a word of encouragement of like the world is really loud and there's a lot of expectations and a lot of people telling you that you've got to work harder and do and do and do and do.
Um,
But, right, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and figure out it's not even a sense of self, but just what do you want out of life and
mhm,
how do you get there? And chances are those things are not going to just be I want to be a billionaire, so I'm going to work super hard, right? It's going to be, I want to feel loved and I want to just be happy. And those are going to be kind of your guiders for why you should be doing some of this work and how to kind of pull it back to find really what that path is to get those things. So
yeah,
yeah, and
that's
you
so
can do
true.
it. Everyone can do it. So
Yeah, I think that's, you hit the nail on the head. Is like, I think sometimes we feel like what will make me happy is when I go and I do these things and I get these accomplishments. But when people get there, one of the first things they tend to say is, I want to feel peace, I want to feel love, I want to feel free, all of which performance-based anxiety doesn't provide
Mhm.
you, right?
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it keeps you trapped. So I think, your recommendation of really coming back to know who you are will guide you in the right direction, and being able to be grounded is really one of the first steps to doing that. And I have to say, whenever I talk to Madison, she has just such a soothing voice. I don't know what it is, but it's the tone, or it's the cadence, or whatever it is. But I always feel so relaxed by your voice. And sometimes that in and of itself is something that we need to be like, oh, let me just be in this conversation, or let me be in this space with somebody. So if anybody would like to work with Madison, I'm going to put a link to her bio and ways that you can work with her. And she is amazing with anxiety, as you probably can hear in this conversation, whether you're watching us and seeing us or just hearing our voices. She definitely has a very calming, grounded presence. So she's a pleasure to work alongside with, but I can guarantee you she's a pleasure to work with as well. So, Madison, anything else you'd like to offer to our friends, or?
I don't think so. Thank you for having me and thank you everyone for listening. And it was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Like I said, I'm going to put a link to your bio and ways that they can contact our practice so they can work with you.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening.